Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 92nd deck and it's titled Jenson Car-Three-Lion. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So very quickly, before we get into the actual deck tech, I want to take a second, highlight some of our social media accounts. These are all great ways for you to reach out to us if you ever have any questions, if you want some updates on the decks and what's going on with the channel, or maybe you want to suggest a card that you would like to see. These are all phenomenal ways to do that. You can find us on Twitter, Reddit, email, and if you're looking to support the channel a little bit more directly, you can head on over to our TCG Player affiliate link, which is in the link to the description below. And any purchases you make once you've clicked on that link, we get a little bit of a kickback from, just as a thank you for your patronage. And then finally, the most direct way that you could help support us is patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide. Anyone who helps us out over there gets access to the deck lists a week early. You get access to a Discord channel where we brew up some of the decks and also actually record some games. So if you're interested in being in some of the videos, that is a great way to do that. And then you also get access to the unedited gameplay videos, as well as one of our random cards shipped to you every single month as a thank you for all of your support. And finally, you get the guarantee from me that any cards you suggest will be turned into a deck for this channel eventually. It might take me a while, but I guarantee I will get there. I can't promise that to anyone but our patrons. So thank you all so much for all of your support. And of course, we got to shout out our 4 current patrons. We've got William Swiftfoot, we've got Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, and Eric Hui. So to the 4 of you, thank you all so much for all of your support. And if none of that is your style, you can always just like the video, subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. We're aiming to get to 400 subscribers by the end of the year, and we are super, super close. So if you're not already subscribed, I would love to see you hit that button. But with all of that out of the way, let's move on to our actual deck tech. So let's take a look at our random card of the week. And this is a random card that is a little bit unique. It's also pretty new, which I think is a ton of fun. And that card is going to be Threefold Signal. So Threefold Signal is 3 mana for an artifact that says when Threefold Signal enters the battlefield, scry 3, and each spell you cast that's exactly 3 colors has replicate 3. Which means that when we cast it, we copy it for each time we pay its replicate cost. We may choose new targets for the copies, and a copy of a permanent spell becomes a token. So if we cast a 3 mana spell that is 3 colors, we can then pay 3 additional mana and copy it. So this can get incredibly out of hand, it can be super powerful, but because of the limitations of needing to cast 3 color spells, I decided that for our commander, we wanted to be 5 colors. We want to have access to all the colors in the game, so that way we're not really limited to what we can and cannot cast. And I couldn't find a great commander that dealt specifically with things that cost 3 colors, so I decided to go with Jenson Carthalion Druid Exile. And Jenson is 2 mana for a 2/2 legendary creature human druid. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, scry 1. All of our spells that are 3 colors are going to be multicolored, so we get to scry every time we cast one. And if we happen to cast a spell that is all 5 colors, we also create a 4/4 angel token with flying and vigilance. Now, we have some 5-colored cards in the deck, but not a ton, so I don't think that's going to be super relevant. And Jenson, we can also pay 5, tap, and add white, blue, black, red, green to our mana pool. So if we don't have the colors we need, we can kind of use Jenson to filter, kind of get the things that we need. So what we're aiming to do here is take our Threefold Signal and try to break it to the best of our ability, I suppose. So there's a couple of ways we're going to do that, and let's take a look at the themes that are going to help us get there. So first up, we've got to make sure that we have 3 colored spells. And so this deck is filled to the brim with charms. We have things like Esper Charm, which is a white, a blue, and a black for an instant, and it says choose 1, destroy target enchantment, draw 2 cards, or target player discards 2 cards. So we have a ton of utility in the spells that we're playing because a lot of the charms have multiple ways of interacting with the board or drawing cards or pumping up creatures. So they always give us options, and there's an absolute ton of charms, especially because Streets of New Capenna came out with a bunch of new charms. We've got the original Esper charms cycle, we've got the ones from Khans of Tarkir, we've got the ones from the Elder Dragons, so there are a ton of them to choose from. Plus, we also get to play some super powerful 3-colored cards like the Ultimatums, which we will talk about a little bit later. So 3-colored cards is really where we want to be because that's the kind of card that we can copy with Threefold Signal. Now, obviously, since we have a ton of spells in our deck and since we're copying a ton of spells in this deck, our second theme are going to be cards that care about us casting or copying spells. So that's where Archmage Emeritus comes in, which is 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard. It's got Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So this is incredibly relevant because it says cast or copy. So if we just cast an Esper charm, we could say draw 2 cards. Archmage of Emeritus triggers, we draw a 3rd card, which is already pretty good. That's just 3 mana, draw 3 at instant speed. However, if we have Esper Charm and we copy it with Threefold Signal, we draw a card for the original Esper Charm and for the copy of Esper Charm. So we could, for 6 mana, so 3 to cast Esper Charm, 3 to replicate with the Signal, so 6 total mana, draw 2 cards twice, so that's 4, and then Archmage Emeritus draws us 2 more, so 6 mana instant speed, draw 6 cards is pretty impressive. And we can make sure to kind of mix and match. Maybe there's an enchantment we got to get rid of, maybe we just want to make sure someone has no cards in their hand, so they discard. Whatever we're trying to do, it's nice to make sure that we are refilling our hand, especially because since we're so heavy on the instants and sorceries, this essentially just lets us replace any spell that we draw. So it's very important we have things that work well with casting and copying spells. And then finally, I'm talking up a lot of what we want to do, but it really sounds like we need a ton of mana for this deck, and that is 100% true. So our last major theme is to make sure that we have the lands we need for this deck to run. We want to ramp like crazy, and most 5-color decks aren't going to run a ton of basic lands. This deck is an exception. We actually have quite a few basic lands in our deck because we want to make sure that any of our ramp spells can get our lands out of our deck, because most ramp spells will specify basic lands. Hour of Promise, on the other hand, is 4 and a green for a sorcery that just says search your library for up to 2 land cards, so they can be any lands, and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then, if you control 3 or more deserts, create 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. I'm not going to lie to you, we do not have any deserts in here, so it is impossible for us to do that. However, it is very relevant for us to be able to get any land. And you'll figure out why in just a second, because we are going to immediately transition into some of our key cards. So now that we have all of our charms, we have our ultimatums, we have our draw, we have our ramp, what exactly are we getting with Hour of Promise? And the very short answer to that is the World Tree. Because our mana is mostly basics and because a lot of our spells are 3-colored, we need to make sure that we have the mana we need to cast our spells. So the World Tree is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a green, but as long as you control 6 or more lands, lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. So that is incredibly important. That just means that no longer do we have to worry about not having the right colors of mana for our spells. We can just, as much mana as we have, cast that many spells. Now, the World Tree also has another ability, which is white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green, tap, sacrifice the World Tree, search your library for any number of god cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. I would highly recommend not using this ability if you're playing this deck because there's not a single god in the entire deck, and that just sacrifices the World Tree and now your mana fixing's gone, so not a relevant ability for us. It's really only in here for the mana fixing, but maybe somehow that will become relevant. You never really know. But that is our, I guess if I had to pick like the main key card, it's probably the World Tree, but we do have some others that are also very important as well. The next of which is going to be Ral Storm Conduit. So Ral Storm Conduit, 2 blue, red for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Ral. He has a static ability that's very similar to Archmage Emeritus that says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Ral Storm Conduit deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So while the Archmage Emeritus is drawing us cards, Ral is doing damage. But again, that's exactly what we want, because now we're able to maybe replicate something 2 or 3 times and do 3 or 4 different damage spread around the board, maybe kill someone who's at a low life total, maybe kill a planeswalker, just kind of controlling what's happening, controlling people's life totals. And if we can copy enough spells and cast enough spells, this could just be a win condition for the deck. And I haven't even talked about his abilities yet. That's just when he's sitting on the board doing nothing. He also has the ability to +2 and scry 1, which not terrible, but not exactly super relevant. But what is relevant is this -2 when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. That is incredibly relevant for what we're trying to do, because if we cast a giant ultimatum, we can just -2 Ral, cast the ultimatum, and get 2 copies of an ultimatum. That is super, super powerful, and even on something small like a charm, copying it can be incredibly relevant because we technically have spent no mana to do it. We've just -2'd Ral. So very powerful card and kind of a win condition in the deck, even though it's not going to necessarily look like one right away. And then finally, we come to our last key card, and that is going to be Meeting of the Five. This is one of our major card draw, well, I guess card draw isn't the right word, one of our major value engines in the deck, because Meeting of the Five is 3 white, blue, black, red, green for a sorcery. Exile the top 10 cards of your library. You may cast spells with exactly 3 colors from among them this turn, and you can add 2 mana of every color. Spend this mana only to cast spells with exactly 3 colors. So it's not super powerful, and in fact, I have seen a lot of talk about it being very bad. However, I think in this particular deck, it does a lot of work, because what we can do is exile the top 10 cards of our library, and since we have mostly cards with 3 colors, we can cast pretty much anything we run into. Now, admittedly, it's not going to give us the mana we need to cast an ultimatum, but with 10 mana, we can cast at least 3 charms, and being able to cast at least 3 with maybe some extra depending on the lands that we have left over might be enough to help us turn the tide in what we need to do, because we can pick and choose the best cards from the top 10 of our library. So I don't think that this is, again, a win condition by any stretch of the term, but I do think that it's going to be a huge value engine and really help us dig for the things that we need at any given time. So I think Meeting of the Five earns a spot as a key card, and even though, like I said, I've heard a lot of talk of it not being very good, I think in this deck it puts in enough work to deserve its place here. But those are our key cards, and the next thing we've got to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck, some cards that synergize very well together, and again, while they may not be win conditions on their own, they kind of help push us to an eventual win or maybe just a small value engine. The first of which is going to include the first ultimatum that we're going to talk about, Eerie Ultimatum, and we're going to combine that up with Maestro's Charm. So Eerie Ultimatum is white, black, green for a sorcery that says return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, this looks a little bit weird because we don't have a ton of permanents in the deck. We're mainly a spell-focused deck, but we do have things like Ral and Archmage Emeritus and the Threefold Signal and some very important pieces that could wind up in the graveyard. Plus, the nice thing about Eerie Ultimatum is that it doesn't say non-land permanents, so if we have any lands that have gone to the graveyard, we can also get those back too. And the real reason that this is going to be super good, though, is because we can combine this with Maestro's Charm, and one of Maestro's Charm's abilities is look at the top 5 cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. This is a great way to dig for things that we want to return with Eerie Ultimatum, especially because Maestro's Charm, which I don't think I read, is blue, black, red for an instant. It has the ability that we just talked about. Each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life, and it also can deal 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Because Maestro's Charm is an instant, we can look at the top 5 cards of our library at the end of our opponent's turns And then we pick the one that maybe we can't get back with Eerie Ultimatum, a spell, something like that. And we can look at the other 4 that we're going to put into our graveyard and try to pick and choose what's going in there that we can get back with Eerie Ultimatum. And that also helps us fill up our graveyard so we can kind of surprise our opponents. They might not have known we had Threefold Signal because it was on top of our deck. Now we put it into our graveyard, we get it back with Eerie Ultimatum. So there are some very sneaky things that you can do with this. And even though we're not running a ton of permanents, I think that the permanents we are running are important enough that this is pretty good for us to be doing in the deck. And then our next cool interaction is also going to involve an ultimatum, this time though Titanic Ultimatum, and we're going to combine this one up with Rith's Charm. So both of these are Naya cards, Titanic Ultimatum being red, red, green, 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 white, white, and Rith's Charm being red, green, white. But Titanic Ultimatum is a sorcery that says until end of turn, creatures you control get +5/+5, first strike, lifelink, and trample. So if we have any number of creatures on board, even if they're just little 1/1s, they're going to become 6/6s with first strike, lifelink, and trample. So this can immediately end a game if we have a board full of creatures, which, with the help of Rith's Charm, which is an instant, choose 1, destroy a target non-basic land, put 3 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens onto the battlefield, or prevent all damage a source of your choice would deal this turn, we're able to get those tokens pretty quickly and at the end of someone's turn. Rith's Charm, we can get 3 sapperlings at the end of someone's turn, untap, cast a Titanic Ultimatum, and now our 3 1/1s have, well, +5/+5, first strike, lifelink, and trample. So we go from being able to have maybe no damage on board if we had no creatures, to having 18 total damage, gaining us 18 life, first striking, so they're not really going to be blocked super well. They've got trample, so they're going to hit our opponents. And this can kind of get some people out of nowhere as well, especially if it's toward the end of the game and people's life totals are pretty low. So while it's not super strong, I think it is strong enough to earn a spot in our cool interactions. So that leads us finally to the budget of the deck. And this week, the budget came out to $73.01, which is pretty good. We're about $27 below our budget limit. And our most expensive card in the entire deck is actually Ruinous Ultimatum, which is red, red, white, 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 black, black for a sorcery that says destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. And even though Ruinous Ultimatum is the most expensive card in the deck, it's still not too expensive. It's about $5.45. So even if we cut it from the deck, we're only dipping down to about $69 for the total budget, which is lower than 73 to be sure, but it's not completely breaking the bank. The issue is that in this deck, there's a lot of cards that cost between $3 and $5, so it's tough to argue that cutting one is going to really lower the cost of the deck. You'd probably have to cut quite a few, but if that's something you're interested in doing, there are some sweet 3-mana spells that didn't quite make the cut that you could include in here if you're looking to trim the price a little bit. On the other hand, if you're looking to increase the price of the deck, normally I would say I have some suggestions for you there, but honestly, in this one, I don't. There aren't a ton of cards that I would recommend including in the deck other than obvious like staple cards that are, $20, $30, but that feels kind of lame to me, so I don't really want to suggest that. Instead, I want to talk a little bit about a quality of life upgrade for this deck and what I would replace. And as soon as I start talking about this, it's going to feel very obvious as to why I'm replacing this card, but if you want to just improve the deck and make it better, I would slot in Mizzix's Mastery and take out Sphinx Summoner. So we'll start with the card that we're actually taking out, which is a bit of a change from what we normally do, because I didn't realize what Sphinx Summoner actually did until we were in the middle of recording the game for this. So Sphinx Summoner, 3 blue-black for an artifact creature Sphinx. It's a 3/3 with flying. When Sphinx Summoner enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. Now, this is a great card, and it can do a ton of good work, but in our deck, Sphinx Summoner is literally the only artifact creature, because when I was putting this deck together, when I was sleeving up the cards, when I had gotten the cards all good to go, I've shuffled them together, I'm in the middle of the game, I literally, and this is a bit of a spoiler, I do apologize, I tutor it out of my deck, And as soon as I do, I realize I've made a huge mistake because it says artifact creature and not artifact. And this was originally in here to get Threefold Signal, which obviously it can't get because it's not a creature. And so I kind of realized that this is a useless card in the deck, being the only artifact creature and it can't search for itself. So that is my mistake. I will take full blame for that one. But on the bright side, I do have a quality of life upgrade that I would suggest putting in instead, and that is Mizzix's Mastery, which is 3 and a red for a sorcery. And it says exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Exile Mizzix's Mastery. So for 4 mana, we can cast any of our ultimatums, we can cast any of our charms. That is incredibly powerful, but it also has overload for 5 red, red, red. And with overloading it, we now exile every single card out of our graveyard that's an instant or sorcery and cast every single one of them. That's all the ultimatums. That is all of the charms. That's all of the ramp. All of that is now coming back, and we're able to just kind of overwhelm the board. Probably do a ton of damage, draw a ton of cards, get a bunch of lands into play. Mizzix's Mastery, while not technically winning the game on its own, is probably the closest we're going to get to an actual win condition for this deck, other than just beating people down with tokens and ultimatums and things like that. So if you decide to pick up this deck, I would very, very highly recommend taking out Sphinx Summoner and putting in Mizzix's Mastery. And I know this is difficult because I'm suggesting an almost $5 card. If you don't want to replace it with Mizzix's Mastery, at least just take Sphinx Summoner out and put in some other 3-colored card that is better, because, again, I apologize, Sphinx Summoner, nowhere near what I expected it to do. I just didn't read the line as well as I probably should have. So no out-of-budget upgrade this week, instead just the quality of life upgrade. But with all of that being said, let's move into the very final piece of this deck tech, which is seeing how the deck performs in a game. So we are going to run this deck up against 3 opponents this week and see how we can do. The first of which is going to be Falco Spara Pact Weaver, being played by Cow, Belakor the Dark Master, being played by Bilal, and Shauna Purifying Blade, being played by Jason. So first up, Falco Spara is a counter-style deck, so Cow just kind of wants to put a ton of counters on his creatures, doesn't really care what kinds of counters, +1/+1, shield, -1/-1, because with those, he's going to be able to look at the top card of his deck and cast that card by removing counters from his creatures. So it's really just a value engine that he wants to make a ton of big creatures, and then kind of make them just a little bit smaller so he can play more things. So I think it's going to be super sweet. I've never seen a Falco deck before. I'm very interested to see what it can do. And then next up is Bilal's Belakor the Dark Master deck. This is a demon deck. He wants to play as many demons as possible and just start swinging with massive flying creatures. I think overall, I'm not 100% sure what to think about Belakor. I think that it can be very strong, but because demons tend to be pretty expensive in terms of mana cost, I don't know exactly how well it's going to play, so we'll see how that goes. And then finally, we have Jason's Shauna deck. And I'm not going to lie to you, I think this is the deck that I am the most concerned about this week, because I know that Jason is playing Shauna as a Soul Sisters deck. So he wants to just gain as much life as possible in tiny increments, so that way at the end of his turn, he can pay a ton of mana, draw a ton of cards, and then just repeat the process. I don't think we're going to have an easy time of knocking him out of the game if he's just drawing a ton of cards and gaining a ton of life. So that is something that I am worried about, because our finishing power comes from doing damage with our ultimatums, with our charms, and with our tokens. And if he's just gaining a ton of life, he's going to be tough to take care of. So that is my prediction for the deck to watch out for the most this week, but any of them could fall into that slot as well. So let me know what you all think of the deck. Let me know if you like the video and the gameplay as well, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Cow goes first, followed by Bilal, Jason, and then myself. On Cow's first turn, he plays a Rimewood Falls. Bilal plays a Crumbling Necropolis. Jason plays a Fortified Village untapped, revealing a forest, and then casts a Johnny's Welcome, gaining a life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under his control. I play a forest, Cow plays a forest and then casts Sakura Tribe Elder, immediately sacrificing it to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Bilal plays an island. Jason plays a forest and casts Trelisara Moon Dancer, putting a +1/+1 counter on her and scrying 1 whenever he gains a life, which he does right away as this triggers a Johnny's Welcome, gaining him a life. I play a swamp and cast Rampant Growth, searching my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Cow plays a forest and casts his commander Falco Spara Pact Weaver, which enters with a shield counter, allows Cow to look at the top card of his library at any time, and also cast the top card of his library by removing a counter from a creature he controls in addition to paying its mana cost. Bilal plays a swamp. Jason casts an Essence Warden, gaining a life whenever a creature enters the battlefield, triggering the Welcome, gaining a life, triggering Trelisara, putting a +1/+1 counter on her, and scrying 1. Then he plays an island and casts Sakura Tribe Elder, gaining 2 life, scrying 1 twice, and putting 2 counters on Trelisara. He then attacks me for a total of 6 damage with Trelisara. On my turn, I cast Grow from the Ashes, searching my library for a basic land, putting it into play. Cow casts Arcane Signet and casts Lae'zel Vlaakith's Champion, letting him double the amount of counters he puts on his creatures. This also gains Jason a life, letting him put a counter on Trelisara and scry 1. Bilal plays a mountain and casts Toxic Deluge, paying 7 life so all creatures get -7/-7, wiping the board. In response though, Jason sacrifices Sakura Tribe Elder, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into play tapped. On Jason's turn, he casts his commander Shauna Purifying Blade, letting him pay X mana in his end step to draw X cards, but X can't be greater than the life he's gained this turn. He also gains a life when she enters, allowing him to pay a mana in his end step, drawing a card. I play a Mystic Monastery and cast Migration's Path, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. Cow plays a Llanowar Reborn, which has Graft 1, and then casts Mirari's Wake, letting his lands tap for 2 mana each and giving his creatures +1/+1. Bilal plays a mountain and casts Dockside Extortionist, creating 3 treasure tokens since his opponents control 3 artifacts and or enchantments. This allows him to cast his commander Belakor the Dark Master, drawing a card and losing a life when it enters since he controls 1 demon, and also allowing him to do damage to any target equal to the power of any other demon that enters under his control. Jason casts a Grazing Gladeheart, gaining a life when it enters, and also now allowing him to gain 2 life whenever he plays a land, which he does, playing Simic Growth Chamber, returning a forest to his hand. He then attacks Cow for 3 with Shauna, gaining 3 more life thanks to lifelink, then at the end of turn he pays 1 mana for Shauna to draw a card. I cast my commander Jenson Carthalion, letting me scry 1 when I cast a multicolored spell, and create a 4/4 angel token if that spell was all 5 colors. Cow casts a Fractal Harness where X equals 8, creating a 0/0 fractal token with 8 +1/+1 counters on it, doubling those counters whenever it attacks. Bilal casts Siphon Mind, making each opponent discard a card, and then Bilal draws 3 and plays a Path of Ancestry. Jason attacks me for 3 with Shauna, gaining 3 life thanks to lifelink, and in his second main phase he plays a Plains, gaining 2 more life, and then casts Crested Sunmare, giving his other horses indestructible and also making a 5/5 horse token in each end step if he gained life that turn, gaining another life when it enters. Then, in Jason's end step, he pays 1 mana for Shauna, drawing a card, and also creates a horse token. Still at the end of turn, I cast Rith's Charm, making 3 1/1 Saproling tokens and scrying 1. On my turn though, I simply untap and pass. Cow moves straight to combat, attacking Bilal with his Fractal, doubling the counters on it, making it a 17/17, and then Bilal blocks with Dockside Extortionist, killing it. Second main phase, he plays an island and casts Return of the Wildspeaker, drawing 17 cards since he controls a creature with 17 power. After that, he casts an Incubation Druid, grafting the counter from Llanowar Reborn onto it. Then he casts Sun-Scorched Region, gaining a life and putting a +1/+1 counter on it whenever an opponent casts a spell. Finally, he casts Slip Out the Back on his own Fractal, phasing it and the Fractal Harness out until his next turn, also putting another +1/+1 counter on it. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Forbidding Ruins and casts Demon of Dark Schemes, giving all creatures -2/-2 when it enters, giving Bilal an energy for each creature that dies. This also triggers the Regent, letting Cow gain a life and put a counter on it, but Bilal does 5 damage to the Regent as well, thanks to Balakor killing it. In response to everything getting -2/-2, I cast Daragaz's Charm to give Jenson +3/+3 until end of turn, saving my commander and scrying 1, then a good portion of the board is wiped away, giving Bilal 4 total energy. Jason casts Tatiova, Benthic Druid, gaining a life when she enters and letting him gain a life and draw a card whenever he plays a land, which he immediately does, playing a Bant Panorama. He then sacrifices the Panorama, searching his library for basic planes, putting it into play tapped, gaining another life and drawing another card. Then in his end step, he creates a horse token since he gained life this turn. Still at the end of turn, I cast Treva's Charm to destroy Cow's Morari's Wake, scrying 1 thanks to Jenson. On my turn, I play a Swamp, and then cast Conflux, letting me search my library for a card of each color and put them into my hand, also making an Angel token while I scry 1. Then, when the spell resolves, I get Hour of Promise for green, Archmage Emeritus for blue, Stormkiln Artist for red, Sphinx Summoner for black, and Jeskai Ascendancy for white. Cow plays a Plains, and then casts Zagana Utopian Speaker, drawing a card since he controls another creature with a +1/+1 counter, and also giving all his creatures with +1/+1 counters trample. He attacks Jason with the Fractal, doubling the counters on it, making it a 35/35. Jason blocks 10 of it with his indestructible horses, but still takes 25 trample damage. Then in Cow's second main phase, he casts Smuggler's Share, letting him draw a card in each end step for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards that turn, and also make a treasure token for each opponent who had 2 or more lands enter under their control. Bilal plays a Temple of the False God, casts Mind Stone, and then attacks Jason for 5 and Cow for 6 with Balakor. Second main phase, Bilal casts All Is Dust, making each player sacrifice all colored permanents they control, but in response, Cow casts Endless Detour, putting the spell on top of Bilal's deck. Jason casts a Cleric class, gaining an additional life whenever he would gain a life. Then he plays a Forest, gaining 2 life and drawing a card, and attacks Bilal for 15 with his horses. Then in his second main phase, he casts Luminarch Veteran, gaining 2 life when it enters, and also allowing him to gain a life whenever another creature enters under his control. After that, he casts Beast Within, destroying Cow's Fractal and making him a 3/3 Beast token. At the end of turn, Jason pays 3 mana to draw 3 cards and also creates yet another horse token, gaining 4 life. This also lets Cow draw a card with Smuggler's Share. On my turn, I play an island and cast Stormkiln Artist, letting me make a treasure token whenever I cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. Then I cast Hour of Promise, making a treasure and searching my library for 2 lands, putting them into play. This gets me Command Tower and the World Tree, which lets all my lands tap for any color of mana. Then I move to combat, attacking Jason for 4 with my Angel token, and at the end of turn, Cow makes a treasure with Smuggler's Share. Cow plays a Rogue's Passage and casts Vastwood Surge, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. Bilal plays an island and activates Demon of Dark Schemes, returning Dockside Extortionist from his graveyard to play, getting 6 treasures when it enters. He then attacks Jason for 11 with his demons. Then, second main phase, he casts All Is Dust again, making everyone sacrifice all colored permanents they control, and this time it resolves, giving Bilal 16 energy. Jason plays a Rejuvenating Springs and casts Soul Warden, gaining him a life whenever a creature enters the battlefield. After that, he casts Twin Blade Paladin, putting a +1/+1 counter on it whenever he gains life, which he immediately does as it enters. He then recasts his commander Shauna, gaining another life and putting another counter on the Paladin. I play a Plains and cast Archmage Emeritus, letting me draw a card whenever I cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. This also gains Jason a life and puts a counter on his Paladin. Then I cast Jeskai Ascendancy, letting me draw a card, discard a card, untap all my creatures, and give them +1/+1 whenever I cast an instant or sorcery spell. I then cast Peer's Whim, choosing myself as a friend and each of my opponents as a foe, letting me search my library for a land, putting it into play tapped, while my opponents have to sacrifice an artifact or enchantment. This also draws me 2 cards, makes me discard a card, and gives my creatures +1/+1 till the end of turn. At the end of turn though, Cow casts a Broker's Charm, drawing 2 cards. On Cow's turn, he plays an island and recasts his commander Falco, who enters with a shield counter, gains Jason a life, and puts a counter on the Twin Blade Paladin. Bilal plays a Sunken Hollow and recasts his commander Belakor, losing a life, drawing a card, gaining Jason a life, and putting a counter on the Paladin. Jason casts a Kasali Pride Mage, which has Exalted and can be sacrificed to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This gains him a life, puts a counter on the Paladin. He then plays a Selesnya Sanctuary, returning a forest to his hand, and attacks me for 20 total damage with the Twin Blade Paladin, and since I don't want to lose my Archmage, I take the damage. Then, in his second main phase, Jason sacrifices the Pride Mage to destroy my Jeskai Ascendancy, and in his end step, he pays a mana to draw a card. On my turn, I cast Far Wanderings, searching my library for 3 basic lands, putting them into play tapped since I have Threshold. Then I also draw a card from the Archmage, and after that I cast Cultivate, drawing another card and searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other to my hand. Then I play a Plains and recast my commander Jenson, letting Jason gain a life and put a counter on his Paladin. Cow casts a Wickerbow Elder, entering with a -1/-1 counter, and giving Cow the ability to remove a counter from it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This also gains Jason another life and puts a counter on the Paladin. He then casts Together Forever, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures, and plays a Selesnya Sanctuary, returning a Plains to his hand. Then he removes a counter from Falco to cast Orzhov Advocus from the top of his library, gaining Jason another life and putting another counter on the Paladin. Bilal casts Magnus the Red, doing 4 damage to Jason when it enters, and making his instants and sorceries cost 1 less for each token he controls. This also gains Jason another life and puts a counter on the Twin Blade Paladin. Bilal then casts Orcus, Prince of Undeath for X=2, returning Dockside Extortionist from his graveyard to play since its mana value is 2. In response, I sacrifice my treasure, so Bilal only makes 2 treasures when it enters. Then Jason gains a life and puts a counter on his Paladin, while Bilal does 5 more damage to Jason, and finally moves to combat, attacking Jason for 6 with Belakor. Jason moves straight to combat, attacking Cow for 13, but he blocks with Orzhov Advocus, tilling it and taking no damage. Second main phase, Jason casts Fumigate, destroying all creatures and gaining a life for each creature destroyed. This gains him 10 life and removes the shield counter from Falco, leaving him as the only creature on the board, while Cow activates Together Forever, returning Wickerbow Elder to his hand when it dies. Once that's resolved, Jason casts Luminous Phantom from its graveyard, allowing him to pay a life whenever another creature he controls leaves the battlefield. He also plays Path of Ancestry, and at the end of turn, I cast Cabaretti Charm, making 2 1/1 citizen tokens. On my turn, I play a Forest and cast Riveteer's Charm, exiling the top 3 cards of my library and being able to play them until the end of turn. This allows me to cast Boundless Realms from exile, searching my library for a number of basic lands equal to the number of lands I control, which is currently 19. Unfortunately though, I can only get 9 since all of the basic lands I have left in my deck are now gone. Once that's resolved, I cast Titanic Ultimatum, giving my creatures +5/+5, First Strike, Trample, and Lifelink until the end of turn. This allows me to attack Cow for 12, gaining 12 life. Cow plays a Plains and casts Wickerbow Elder, entering with a -1/-1 counter, and then attacks me for 3 with Falco. Bilal recasts his commander Belakor, losing a life and drawing a card. He then casts Heralds of Tzeentch, cascading into an Offer You Can't Refuse, which he opts not to cast. Then, when the Heralds enter, Bilal does 3 damage to me. Jason casts Cultivate, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into his hand. He then plays an island and recasts his commander Shauna before attacking me for 1. On my turn, I play a mountain and recast my commander Jenson. Cow plays an island and removes a counter from Wickerbow Elder to cast Ordeal of Thassa from the top of his library, enchanting Falco and allowing him to get a +1/+1 counter when he attacks. He then attacks me with both his creatures, putting a counter on Falco. I block the Elder with a Citizen, killing it, but only taking 4 damage. Still in combat, Cow casts Keep Watch, drawing 2 cards since there are 2 attacking creatures. Then, in his second main phase, he casts Jugan Defends the Temple, creating a 1/1 Human Monk token. On Bilal's turn, he casts Pink Horror, doing 4 damage to me when it enters, and also casts Liliana's Contract, drawing 4 cards and losing 4 life. This also gives him the ability to win the game in his upkeep if he controls 4 demons with different names. After that, he plays a Hall of Storm Giant tapped and passes. Jason casts Retreat to Kazandu, letting him put a +1/+1 counter on a creature or gain 2 life whenever he plays a land, which he immediately does, playing a Grasslands, gaining 2 life. At the end of turn, Jason pays 2 mana for Shauna to draw 2 cards, and still at the end of turn, I cast Jund Charm to put 2 +1/+1 counters on Jenson and scry 1. On my turn, I cast Cruel Ultimatum, making Bilal sacrifice a creature, lose 5 life, and discard 3 cards, while I return a creature from my graveyard to my hand, gain 5 life, and draw 3 cards. This returns Archmage Emeritus to my hand, and Bilal sacrifices Pink Horror, which creates 2 2/2 blue demon tokens, doing 4 damage to me. Then I recast the Archmage, and also cast Fabricate, searching my library for an artifact, in this case Threefold Signal, putting it into my hand. I then cast the Threefold Signal, scrying 3 and giving all my 3-colored spells Replicate 3. In response to the scry though, Cow casts Krosan Grip, destroying the Threefold Signal, and once that's destroyed, I cast Inspired Ultimatum, gaining 5 life, drawing 6 cards, and doing 5 damage to Jason. Finally, I play an Arcane Sanctum, and cast Joda Archmage Eternal, letting me pay 5 mana instead of the mana value of any spell that I cast. In Cow's draw step, Jugan Defends the Temple goes to stage 2, letting him put a +1/+1 counter on 2 of his creatures. After that, he casts Unbreakable Formation, putting a +1/+1 counter on all of his creatures, giving them Indestructible and Vigilance until the end of turn. This allows him to attack Jason with Wickerbow Elder and the Monk for 9, me with Falco for 6, putting a counter on Falco, sacrificing the Ordeal and drawing 3 cards. Jason and I both block as much as we can, killing my Joda and his spirit while I take no damage and Jason takes 3. In his second main phase, Cow casts Ondu Inversion, destroying all non-land permanents, but since his creatures are indestructible, he gets to keep his own board. Bilal casts Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, and also cast Plague Drone, making it so that if an opponent would gain life, they lose that much life instead. Jason sacrifices his Grasslands to search his library for a Canopy Vista, putting it into play. He then recasts his commander Shauna, and also casts Tristani Selesnia's Voice, gaining him life equal to the toughness of any creature that enters under his control. On my turn, I cast Ral's Storm Conduit, and activate Ral's +2 ability, scrying 1. I then cast Ruinous Ultimatum, destroying all non-land permanents my opponents control, and also doing 1 damage to Bilal with Ral. In response, Bilal sacrifices Plague Drone to Razaketh, paying 2 life to search his library for a card and put it into his hand. Cow casts Inspiring Call to make his creatures indestructible, but I cast Obscura Charm to counter the spell. Unfortunately, Cow still has an answer, using Swan Song to counter my counter. This allows him to resolve Inspiring Call, draw 3 cards, and keep his commanders once again, while I do another 1 damage to Bilal. Finally, I recast my commander Jenson alongside Wood Elves, searching my library for a forest, but I fail to find. Cow plays a Rejuvenating Springs, and casts Sanctuary Warden, which enters with 2 shield counters on it, and allows Cow to remove a counter from a creature he controls, to draw a card and create a citizen token whenever the Warden enters the battlefield or attacks. In this case, Cow removes a counter from his Monk, drawing a card and making a citizen. He then attacks Bilal for 2, knocking him out of the game, Jason for 6, and Ral for 6 with Falco, killing the Planeswalker. In his second main phase, he casts Wood Elves, searching his library for a forest and putting it into play, and then also casts Tawashi Guidebot, putting a +1/+1 counter on Wood Elves. Jason plays a Dreamroot Cascade and casts Soul's Attendant, letting him gain a life whenever another creature enters the battlefield, and he follows that up by casting Voice of the Blessed, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever Jason gains life, happening immediately as he gains a life from it entering. He also casts Accomplished Alchemist, gaining a life and putting another counter on the voice. I play a Seaside Citadel and cast Violent Ultimatum, destroying Cow's Falco, Sanctuary Warden, which only destroys one of its shield counters, and Jason's Voice of the Blessed. Then I scry 1 with Jenson and cast Carrion Ultimatum, but since I have no basic lands left in my deck, it does nothing except letting me scry 1. Cow taps his Tawashi Guidebot to draw a card, and then casts Soul Ring and recasts his commander Falco, gaining Jason a life. He also casts Abzan Battle Priest, giving his creatures with +1/+1 counters lifelink and also gaining Jason a life. He attacks Jason for 11 and me for 3. On attacks, he removes a counter from Wood Elves, drawing a card and making a citizen token, and I block the damage with Wood Elves, and Jason blocks 6 with his Alchemist, killing both of our creatures, while Jason takes 5 and Cow gains 7 life. In his second main phase, he plays a Krosan Verge, and then passes. Jason plays a Forest and recasts his commander Shauna, gaining a life. Then at the end of turn, Jason pays a mana, drawing a card. On my turn, I cast Tempt with Discovery, searching my library for a land and allowing each opponent to do the same. For each opponent that does, I get to search for another land. Luckily, everyone takes the deal, so I get 3 lands, putting Savage Lands, Sandstep Citadel, and Nomad Outpost into play, while Cow gets Fortified Village and Jason gets Command Tower. On Cow's turn, he taps the Guidebot, drawing a card, plays a Vine Glimmer Snarl, revealing an island so it comes into play untapped, and casts Armorcraft Judge, drawing 2 cards since he controls 2 creatures with +1/+1 counters. He then attacks Jason with his entire board for 17 total damage, removing a shield counter from the Warden to draw a card and make another citizen. Before blocks, Cow also activates Rogue's Passage, making Wickerbow Elder unblockable. Jason blocks what he can and casts Swords to Plowshares on Wickerbow Elder, but Cow has an answer, countering it with Negate, so Jason still takes 14 damage while Cow gains 6. However, Jason also gains 3 with Shauna, surviving, but unfortunately for him, I cast Jeskai Charm, scrying 1, doing 4 damage to Jason and knocking him out of the game. Cow then casts Outland Liberator and outlasts his Abzan Battle Priest, tapping it and putting a counter on it. On my turn, I cast Sultai Charm, scrying 1, drawing 2, and discarding 1. After that, I cast Eerie Ultimatum, scrying 1 and returning all permanents from my graveyard to play. This ends up returning Wood Elves, Railstorm Conduit, Archmage Emeritus, Joda, Archmage Eternal, Threefold Signal, Jeskai Ascendancy, Sphinx Summoner, and Stormkiln Artist to play. Once they've all entered, I scry 3, search my library for a forest, failing to find, and search my library for an artifact creature, also failing to find. In response to the scry trigger, Cow sacrifices Outland Liberator to destroy my signal once again. Then I activate Ral's -2 ability, copying the next instant or sorcery I cast. This lets me cast and copy a Meeting of the Five, scrying 1, making an Angel token, drawing 3 cards, doing 2 damage to Cow, discarding a card, making 2 treasure tokens, giving my creatures +1/+1, and then exiling the top 20 cards of my library, making 4 mana of each color, being able to cast all 3 colored cards exiled this way. Unfortunately, since this leaves me with 3 cards in my library and none of my draw triggers are May abilities, I decide to lose the game on my own terms, casting Broker's Charm to draw a total of 5 cards, decking myself, and winning Cow the game. Alright, so that was a super sweet game. I'm not gonna lie though, it was a very long game. That game on its own was about 2 hours long, and so there was a lot happening. There were so many board wipes cast. I think a total of 6 total board wipes were cast throughout the course of the game. So it was a very grindy game, and Cow tried multiple times to try to close things out, and someone just kind of always kept stopping him. So at the end, I think everyone's deck really did what it wanted to do. Bilal got hindered pretty badly by all the board wipes. Being able to not play a ton of demons really hurt his deck, because when you're only playing one massive demon every turn and then it gets destroyed, you're not doing too much, unfortunately. Jason did a very good job of gaining a ton of life and having some life gain synergies, and I think that if he hadn't been gaining so much life, he definitely would have died a lot earlier in the game, so very impressive to see his soul sisters keeping him alive. Cow, of course, very good synergies. It's kind of interesting to see all the counters come together and work. I think this is my first time really playing with shield counters in a larger quantity in a deck rather than just 1 or 2 cards, and I think that they really overperformed. I think that seeing Falco survive multiple removal spells and board wipes just because of the shield counters was very impressive, and I think that's something that really helped Cow win toward the end. And then finally, our deck, I mean, it did what it wanted to do. It drew a ton of cards and cast a bunch of spells. At one point, we had literally every land in our deck. Well, I guess that's not true. We had every basic land in our deck. I think there was like one more tap land in there when the game was over. And we literally just drew our entire deck and lost the game. So I think after having played it, it might be worth throwing in some more efficient win conditions, things like maybe Laboratory Maniac or Thassa's Oracle, because you might just deck yourself. But if you don't want to win that way and you just kind of want to have some fun, I do think this deck can win. I think it really depends on if we can get Threefold Signal in play to do a ton of damage, and we just never were quite able to do that. So definitely a ton of fun to play, though. I had an awesome time with this deck. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there are upgrades or maybe downgrades that you would make to the deck. I don't know. And if you have any suggestions for future videos as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy it. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.